stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation on ground at Gravitas? We don't just tell you stories from selected countries from around the world.
2 years since the Myanmar military coup, the people of Myanmar continue to live in a nightmare.
Because it does not suit their propaganda, or because they are too scared to speak truth to power.
Hello and welcome. You're watching WION Pulse. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Let's take a quick look at what's making headlines at this hour. American President Joe Biden holds a bilateral meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Biden has described the relationship between the two nations as the most defining relationship of the 21st century. The debris field discovered by an underwater robot searching near the wreckage of the Titanic for a missing submersible vessel with 5 people on board. Now, experts within the Unified Command are evaluating the information, and this is according to the US Coast Guard. And the United Nations has put the Russian military forces and the affiliated armed groups to its list of shame over violations of children's rights in conflict during the war in Ukraine. And struggling with inflation and the cost of living crisis within the United Kingdom, the British Central Bank has hiked the interest rates to about 5%, while Turkey has raised it to 15%. All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has held his bilateral talks at the White House. The atmosphere, remember, has been electric ever since he stepped onto the lawns of the White House. He also addressed the crowd of the members of the Indian diaspora who had gathered there, and then both the head of the government of India and the head of the state of the United States began their highly awaited bilateral talks. Now, both leaders will also address the members of the press after the talks, and New Delhi and Washington are expected to deepen their defense ties and technology cooperation. The minutes before the beginning of the top-level bilateral talks, both the leaders, in fact, addressed the crowd that was gathered at the South Lawn of the White House. Now, hundreds of members of the Indian-American diaspora lined up outside of the South Lawn to get a glimpse of the Indian Prime Minister at the White House. Now, addressing the crowd, President Joe Biden spoke about the impact that the Quad has had on the geopolitics of the current world.
With your partnership, we've invigorated and elevated the Quad between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan to advance our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Decades from now, people will look back and say the Quad bent the arc of history toward global good, as the Prime Minister describes it.
Quad bent the arc of history for the global good. That's how the American president, in fact, has described the relationship between India and the United States in Quad. Now, the Indian Prime Minister also extended his gratitude to the Bidens for hosting him. He further said that the India-US ties prove the power of democracy. Listen to what the Indian Prime Minister had to say.
Friends, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के समाज और व्यवस्थाएं लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों पर आधारित है। दोनों देशों के संविधान, उसके पहले 3 शब्द, और जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने भी जिसका उल्लेख किया, वी द पीपल, हम दोनों देश अपनी विविधता पर गर्व करते हैं। हम सर्वजन हिताय, सर्वजन सुखाय इस मूलभूत सिद्धांत में विश्वास रखते हैं।
डिप्लोमेटिक दृष्टि से जब किन्हीं 2 देशों के बीच संबंधों की बात की जाती है तो अक्सर औपचारिक जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट, वर्किंग ग्रुप्स और एमओयू उसी के दायरे में आमतौर पर बातचीत होती है। इसका अपना महत्व है ही, लेकिन भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों का असली इंजन हमारे मजबूत पीपल टू पीपल संबंध है।
Just a few hours ago, the White House said that India has decided to sign the Artemis Accords. The Accords bring the like-minded nations together on civil space exploration. As per a US official, NASA and ISRO are in fact developing a strategic framework for human spaceflight cooperation this year. This in an effort to send a joint mission to the International Space Station in 2024. Now, India's Hindustan Aeronautics has also signed a landmark deal with the GE Aerospace, and the MOU includes potential joint production of the GE Aerospace's F414 engines in India. The engines will be co-produced in India to power the Tejas light combat aircraft. Hindustan Aeronautics previously had said it plans to use the engine for a second generation of light combat aircraft. And President Joe Biden and also the First Lady Jill Biden welcomed the Indian Prime Minister at the White House. Washington is looking to solidify its ties with New Delhi in a move to offset China's strategic diplomatic maneuvering and military aggression. And some time from now, the Indian Prime Minister will also be addressing a joint session of the US Congress, which of course will make him the first Prime Minister in Indian history ever to do this twice. Now, the Indian Prime Minister will then conclude his day with a state dinner at the White House hosted by the Bidens. Now, the historic state visit by Prime Minister Modi is expected to be a turning point for the US-India ties. The two leaders will also be signing a maritime deal. This will allow the US naval ships in the region to stop at the Indian shipyards for repair work. This is part of Washington and New Delhi's agenda to modernize their defense cooperation. And to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, has been happening at the White House, we're being joined in by our Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone, who's joining us live from White House in this moment. And we're also joined by Mr. Frederick Fleets, who's the Vice Chairman of America First Policy Institute. He's also joining us live from Washington, D.C. as well. But Jessica, let me begin with you first. Now, looking at the optics of what has played out so far, and also listening to what President Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have said, it does appear to be a bit of a point of inflection in terms of how the India-US ties will progress from here. And what we are looking at, it appears, is arguably the most important relationship that the Americans have in the 21st century.
Yeah, those are the very words of Kurt Campbell, who directs the National Security Council's Indo-Pacific strategy for the White House. Certainly, the Biden administration is very bullish, if you will, on India and very much sees it as a critical partner in the Indo-Pacific. Also in supply chain diversification, making sure that over the next 10 to 15 years, where we make things on this planet is not focused just in East Asia, but rather in South Asia and specifically in India. So all of the partnerships you see these two countries building, whether it's people-to-people ties, visa renewal, speedy visa renewal, more educational exchanges, they're all focused on addressing those two critical needs by the U.S. government. And we know that the White House has just expanded the bilateral conversations to an expanded bilat, so that means that both countries inside the Oval Office have about 10 people on each side from the defense area, the commerce area, the educational area, and all of the various strategic advisors for both leaders. And they're just about to give public remarks to the media and to the world at 12:45, so just in about 10 minutes time. They will go before the cameras, although they are running a little bit late at this hour, Mohammed.
Right.
And give some results of their talks to the public. We do know that there is expected to be at least one question on either side, and so that will be the first time that Prime Minister Modi takes questions in his entire 9 years in office, and that's considered a win by this White House, who very much wants to focus on the ways in which they are increasing press freedom throughout this visit.
Right, absolutely indeed, Jessica. Do continue to stay on with this. Let me bring in Mr. Frederick Fleets, who's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Mr. Fleets, it appears that the United States has pulled off all stops in terms of how it is trying to woo India, and what we are looking at this moment play out in terms of what happened, especially in those opening remarks on the lawns of the White House, where President Biden said that this is going to be an important relationship for the Americans. Why is it that the India-US equation has acquired the significance that it has? Is it to do with the rise of China?
Well, the Biden administration certainly has pulled off all the stops. This is only the third head of state visit during the Biden presidency, and addresses at joint sessions of Congress are unusual, and it's unheard of for a head of state to speak to Congress twice. It's quite an honor for Prime Minister Modi. It's bipartisan recognition in the United States of the crucial U.S.-India relationship, not just in terms of economics, but in terms of security. We have a common adversary, China. We have to work together to counter growing Chinese aggression and influence in the Asia-Pacific region. There also are concerns with India about Ukraine and Russia. We want India to work with us on the Ukraine conflict, to stop cooperating with Russia. And I think we'll make some progress on that. But the key issue here is the threat from China, and I think that's what most of the Modi-Biden discussions will be about.
Absolutely indeed. Now, India has a legacy in terms of how it has conducted its foreign policy. Earlier it was defined as the policy of non-alignment, but we've left the idea of non-alignment behind us. But the substance of it in terms of pursuing a policy that is beneficial for India without taking sides still continues, because what we have is a policy of strategic autonomy. So India clearly has not taken sides in the Russia-Ukraine war. The Americans, of course, would want to change that. But my question is much larger here. Now, what we are looking at play out is the United States that is willing to share even its defense technologies with India. And what do you think has changed in the last 1 decade or so that the Americans are in fact quite clearly now wooing India to be in their camp?
Oh, is that to me?
Yes, Mr. Fleets, that's for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think there's a recognition that we have moved on to a new era. The era after the Cold War means that nations have to take different positions. India is no longer situated between two superpowers. India is facing an aggressive foe that is infringing on its territories, is aggressively fighting against it. And this given the growing threat from China to India and to the world, it's time for a much stronger alliance, much stronger cooperation against this threat. I think we're moving in that direction. And concerning Russia, India is the largest democracy. Russia does not respect democracy, and its aggressive invasion of Ukraine is not a U.S.-Russia issue. It's a global threat to democracy and international security. That's why the U.S. would like to work with India much closer on this conflict.
Absolutely, indeed. And the Indian Prime Minister has said that it is important to ensure that the way forward is, of course, through dialogue and talks. And the Indian Prime Minister also said that India has taken the side of peace because that is the only way that we can, of course, resolve these pretty difficult issues in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. Jessica Stone, if I can bring you in on this, where the Indian Prime Minister and also the American President, touched upon the points of convergence in the political systems in both the nations. Now, for instance, the constitution of both these nations begin with the 3 words, we the people, and this was something that was highlighted by both the leaders there. And they also touched about the importance of people-to-people contacts within the American and the Indian context. Tell us a bit more about, how the United States, of course, wants to work on this front.
Well, people-to-people contact in the context of American politics is actually becoming even more important because increasingly Indian American voters are deciding elections here in this country. Of course, they make up about 1% of the U.S. population, 4.5 million people, but they make up, they're very close to making up the largest number of foreign students here, and in critical battleground states where there are Indian American voters, Indian American advocates will tell you we're deciding elections in Georgia, which has been a very hotly contested state, what we would call a purple state, but definitely turning blue, so more Democrat. Also Wisconsin, Virginia, other critical battleground states in U.S. political circles are also really increasingly, according to Indian American electoral analysts, being decided by this group of voters. And so you do see President Biden courting Indian American voters, having these 7,000 or 8,000 people on the South Lawn, which is very unprecedented, having a vice president, running mate of Indian descent alongside him, regular outreach to the Indian American community. And of course, we know that former President Donald Trump did the same, right? He introduced Prime Minister Modi back in Houston at that 2019 rally. And then Prime Minister Modi did him the same favor in his home city in India, introducing President Trump when he was on the campaign trail. So there are critical ties in electoral politics and definitely something for President Biden to gain electorally, as of course he is a candidate for the office again.
Absolutely, indeed. That of course, is the political background of it. And Mr. Frederick Fleet, as we look at the visuals that are being beamed out of the White House of both the leaders, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also the American President Joe Biden, there seems to be a clear connect between the two of them. But when it comes to the strategy of dealing with China, the United States and the European powers seem to have points of divergence, where the European nations, such as France and Germany, would want to deal with China differently, but the United States want to deal with it differently. Do you think the United States may encounter similar such issues with India when it has to deal with China?
There is some divergence between the United States and Europe on China, but not all European states view the threat the same. I think the British are closer to the United States about how China is exploiting trade. And I think India, although it does not support the aggressive approach to China of the United States, I think India is closer to the U.S. just because Indian territory has been compromised by China. China is next door to India, and I think the two nations are closer. India is not quite where the U.S. is in terms of decoupling from China and taking a much more aggressive approach. My guess is that there'll be a discussion again about the BRICS Bank and India collaborating with China on an alternate reserve currency during this meeting. My hope is India will move away from that. But I think there's some differences, but I do believe India is closer to the U.S. on the threat from China than most European states are.
Interesting. And Jessica Stone, if I can bring you in on this. Now, there are a whole host of different issues, that are in fact being discussed. It's not just defense cooperation. There are stuff like, increasing the number of American consulates in India, about cooperation in space, in semiconductor technologies. These are all pretty important issues. Do you think India and the United States will be able to, in fact, forge stronger ties on all of these fronts?
I think it's an imperative for the Americans that India does make progress, especially in supply chain resilience. The United States has set a very clear line in the sand that it no longer wants to allow a lot of its semiconductor technology to go to China, and it doesn't want to be buying most of its semiconductor technology and manufacturing capacity from China. So it is looking for partners around the world with whom to partner more closely on chip fabrication, on chip development, on chip packaging. So that's why you saw the announcement by Micron of that big packaging plant. That's different than manufacturing, I think we should point out, but it is a step towards it. And if there were to be an actual agreement for semiconductor chip technology to be transferred to India, to be able to be manufactured in India, that would be sort of the next step along this road of increasing manufacturing capacity specifically for semiconductors. And there's really a race around the world, right, to produce these incredibly important components in almost every piece of technology around the world. So yeah, a big push by the United States on that score.
Absolutely, indeed. And Mr. Frederick Fleets, let me in fact give you the last word on this. With the new geopolitics, the realities that are emerging around the world, with the Russia-Ukraine war, being clearly one of those issues that has dominated world politics over the course of the last 16 odd months. And also what has been said today in that address that was made by both the leaders. Do you also believe that this is now going to be the most defining and the most important relationship that the United States has with any country in the world at this moment? Because India-US relationship is clearly something that the United States will be relying on to take on China.
It will be an extremely important relationship. I don't see how the U.S. can take on China without India. But I'll add something else here. There is an urgent need for an interlocutor in the war in Ukraine. And maybe Prime Minister Modi could play that role. No one really knows who could negotiate a ceasefire and peace talks in this conflict. I think Modi is probably among the 5 people who could possibly be acceptable to both sides. My hope is that will be discussed during the meetings between the two leaders.
Pretty sure that's an issue that will definitely come up during the course of the conversation when the two leaders, of course, are speaking with each other, and possibility of interlocutor. India is, of course, well placed considering that it has got good relations with the West and also good relations with Russia. But it'll be difficult to see as to, it will be interesting rather to see as to how all of these progresses. Thank you very much indeed to Mr. Frederick Fleets and also to Jessica Stone for joining us on this broadcast here on WION. And with that, it's also a wrap on this edition of Pulse. Stay tuned.
आने वाली खुशी के लिए एक ख्याल ही काफी है। ईबिक्स कैश हर खुशी के लिए काफी है। कभी कभी खुशी के लिए एक उदाहरण ही काफी है। ईबिक्स कैश हर खुशी के लिए काफी है।
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
After the collapse of the Kherson Dam and the deluge caused, fighting intensifies between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. As the much talked about Ukrainian counter-offensive seems to be getting underway, France, Germany and Poland firm up talks on the security guarantees Ukraine desperately needs. All eyes are now on NATO leaders' July summit in the Lithuanian capital. Will it focus on Ukraine's push for accession to NATO?
Who will be the next US president? As Trump gears up to take on Biden, his deputy Pence calls him unfit. But it's DeSantis who is drumming up support. A dozen Republicans in the fray and counting. Will a crowded contest benefit Trump? Race for the White House on WION. World is One.
Gravitas tells you stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation on ground? At Gravitas, we don't just tell you stories from selected countries from around the world.
2 years since the Myanmar military coup, the people of Myanmar continue to live in a nightmare.
Because it does not suit their propaganda, or because they are too scared to speak truth to power.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views, and analysis. WIONews.com. World is One.
Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
After the collapse of the Kherson Dam and the deluge caused, fighting intensifies between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. As the much talked about Ukrainian counter-offensive seems to be getting underway, France, Germany and Poland firm up talks on the security guarantees Ukraine desperately needs. All eyes are now on NATO leaders' July summit in the Lithuanian capital. Will it focus on Ukraine's push for accession to NATO?
Who will be the next US president? As Trump gears up to take on Biden, his deputy Pence calls him unfit. But it's DeSantis who is drumming up support. A dozen Republicans in the fray and counting. Will a
Welcome back to our continuous coverage of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first ever state visit to the United States of America, because there's a lot that's in fact been happening. A bilateral has in fact been held between the Indian Prime Minister and the American President. This is a relationship that is being now dubbed as the relationship that will redefine the 21st century. We'll be getting you all of these updates, but first let's take a look at what is making headlines at this hour. American President Joe Biden holds bilateral meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Biden has described the ties between the two nations as the most defining relationship of this century. A debris field has been discovered by an underwater robot that was searching near the wreckage of the Titanic for the missing submersible with 5 people on board. The United Nations has put the Russian military forces and its affiliated armed groups to its list of shame over violation of children's rights in the conflict during the war in Ukraine. And struggling with the rising inflation and a cost of living crisis, the United Kingdom has now hiked its key lending rates to 5%, while Turkey has raised its key lending rates to a staggering 15%. All right, so this, of course, is the big moment. The Indian Prime Minister arrived at the White House to an electrifying atmosphere just a little while back. And after addressing the crowd, both the head of the state of the United States and the head of the government in India began their highly awaited bilateral talks. Both leaders will also be addressing members of the press after the talks. Now, New Delhi and Washington are expected to deepen their defense ties and technology cooperation. Now, all of this was something that was, of course, expected well in anticipation, well before the visit began. But what is to be headlined at this moment is the manner in which the United States is approaching its ties with India, where President Biden has gone on to state that the India-US ties will redefine the 21st century. Now, minutes before beginning the top-level bilateral meeting, both the leaders, in fact, addressed the crowd that was gathered at the South Lawn of the White House. Hundreds of members of the Indian-American diaspora had lined up outside of the South Lawns to get a glimpse of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Addressing the crowd of the White House, President Joe Biden spoke about the impact that the Quad has had on the world.
With your partnership, we've invigorated and elevated the Quad between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan to advance our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Decades from now, people will look back and say the Quad bent the arc of history toward global good, as the Prime Minister describes it.
All right, some pretty strong words there. The arc of history will be bent by Quad towards greater global good. Now, the Indian Prime Minister also extended his gratitude for the Bidens to host him. He further said that the India-US ties prove the power of democracy.
फ्रेंड्स, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के समाज और व्यवस्थाएं लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों पर आधारित है। दोनों देशों के संविधान, उसके पहले 3 शब्द, और जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने भी जिसका उल्लेख किया, वी द पीपल, हम दोनों देश अपनी विविधता पर गर्व करते हैं। हम सर्वजन हिताय सर्वजन सुखाय इस मूलभूत सिद्धांत में विश्वास रखते हैं।
डिप्लोमेटिक दृष्टि से जब किन्हीं 2 देशों के बीच संबंधों की बात की जाती है तो अक्सर औपचारिक जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट, वर्किंग ग्रुप्स और एमओयू उसी के दायरे में आमतौर पर बातचीत होती है। इसका अपना महत्व है ही, लेकिन भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों का असली इंजन हमारे मजबूत पीपल टू पीपल संबंध है।
And just a few hours ago, the White House also said that India has decided to sign the Artemis Accords. Now, the Accords bring like-minded nations together on civil space exploration, and as per a US official, NASA and ISRO are developing a strategic framework for human spaceflight cooperation this year. And this is in an effort to send a joint mission to the International Space Station in 2024. And India's Hindustan Aeronautics has also signed a landmark deal with the GE Aerospace. Now, the MOU includes potential joint production of GE Aerospace's F414 engines in India. Now, the engines will be co-produced in India to power the Tejas light combat aircraft. Hindustan Aeronautics previously had said that it plans to use the engine for a second generation of light combat aircraft. Now, President Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden had welcomed the Prime Minister at the White House on Thursday. And Washington is, of course, looking to solidify its ties with New Delhi in a move to offset China's strategic diplomatic maneuvering and also its military aggression. And sometime from now, the Indian Prime Minister will also be addressing the joint session of the US Congress, which will make him the first ever Indian Prime Minister to address the US Congress not once, but twice. The Indian Prime Minister will also conclude his day with a state dinner at the White House that will be hosted by the Bidens. The historic state visit by Prime Minister Modi is expected to be a turning point for the US-India ties. The two leaders will also be signing a maritime deal. This will allow for American naval ships, mark these words, American naval ships in the region will now be allowed to stop at Indian shipyards for repair work. And this is part of Washington and New Delhi's agenda to modernize their defense cooperation. All right, now to give us more updates in terms of what this relationship, of course, means, we're being joined in by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live on this broadcast. Susan, there is much that is going to be written and spoken and analysed in terms of what this, of course, means, this meeting between the two leaders. But in terms of the statements that have been made by both of them, the camaraderie and also the optics that came out of that joint address by both the leaders in the lawns of the White House, what is clear is that the United States looks at its relationship with India very, very seriously, where Biden, in fact, went on to describe it as the relationship that will define the 21st century.
Yeah, and those were words that were also previously echoed by Jake Sullivan as well, really saying that this is a relationship that will define the 21st century prior to Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington. And it's very transparent where the United States stands. It needs a partner and an ally in the Asia Pacific, and a democracy like India, where there are shared values between the two countries, albeit they do have some differences, is the United States understands that it's of great strategic value. So also, there's the aspect of peeling India away from Russia. While the United States has said that it doesn't have any problems with India buying Russian gas as long as it's at a very low under cap price. However, the optics of that for the United States is very important in the international community, that to show that the United States and India are on the same page on a lot of issues, despite the fact that India has its own relations with Russia. That's very important as well. And then we can't underestimate the fact that this is an election year for Joe Biden. Politics are domestic. There are some 5 million Indian Americans in the United States. They are, a lot of them, in swing states. They go to the ballot box and they're watching this meeting very carefully to see how Joe Biden is working with the leader of their home country. So, these are some of the aspects of the importance of the two talking to each other and meeting here.
Absolutely, indeed. And we, of course, expect to hear more from them in just a bit from now. And we've also got my colleague Molly Gambhir, who's also joining us live from Washington, D.C. Molly, we just witnessed, the romance and the camaraderie between the two leaders. And this is such an important visit, both for the Indian Prime Minister and also for the American President Joe Biden, in terms of how they would like to take the India-US equation forward. And it was not just about defense ties, but also a lot was spoken about people-to-people connect. And the United States appears to have pulled off all stops. Now, the United States is planning to open 2 more consulates. It's also changing its visa rules as well. Tell us as to how the United States of America wants to take the people-to-people contact bit forward.
Indeed, Sally, I'm reminded of what the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said earlier, that a number of deliverables from the Indian Prime Minister's U.S. state visit are not just bullet points on a paper. It's a lot more than that. The visit is about people-to-people ties. It's about deepening the trust between the two sides. Also, when it comes to lifting of barriers as far as sharing of technology is concerned, ISET has also been called as a way to go beyond sharing of technology and forging closer relationships between businesses in both the countries. So the overarching theme, of course, has been to deepen the relationship between the two sides, and it's a multifaceted relationship as the defense cooperation, when it comes to sharing of technology, when it comes to people-to-people ties, all of these have been talked about in the run-up to the visit as well. When it comes to specifically the potential that the two sides have, when it comes to the realization that America has at this point when it comes to reaching out to India and needing India's assistance in countering China. On the other hand, India sees the United States as a trusted partner and a source of defense cooperation, which can only grow by leaps and bounds from here onwards, given the fact that the two sides are laying a lot of emphasis on the lifting of barriers, which the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology also focuses on. Also, we've seen the way in which the Indian Prime Minister, his equation with the US President Joe Biden has also been talked about. They have met multiple times, but the rapport that the two leaders shared earlier as well, when the president was talking about the popularity of the Indian Prime Minister here in the United States. So all of these have been facets that have been spoken about in great detail, and the key outcomes will not just be through that joint statement, but it is going to be a lot of symbolism also that comes along with this visit.
Absolutely indeed. Molly, do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, I'm told that we're also being joined by Siddhant Civil, who's also joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Siddhant, in some time from now, we'll see the Indian Prime Minister address the joint sitting of the Congress. And he's doing this not the first time, but the second time, which puts him in a complete league of his own. Tell us a bit about what is to be expected of that address to the joint sitting of the Congress by the Indian Prime Minister.
Well, Saleh, let me start by saying that where I am right now, I'm inside the very room where the press conference will take place between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Joe Biden. Everyone is waiting for that big press conference in which questions will be taken by the two sides. Now, several areas of convergences have occurred, including on defense, trade, on consular access, opening of consulates, and also space as well. We will see big ticket announcements being made from this very room inside the White House, and the big focus remains as to how India and the US cement their relationship further. Now, the big focus will be also on the address of the US of the Indian Prime Minister at the US Congress. He leaves from this place after the press conference to the Capitol Hill, which is a short drive from this place. And in fact, one thing I would like to point out that from the conversation when it started at the Oval House almost more than 1 hour ago, the time period, they have crossed the time limit of the bilateral which was given. So that is why everything is now essentially going into the other event which is taking place.
Absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed to Siddhant Civil, to Molly Gambhir, and also to Susan Tehrani for joining us and getting us all those details. This, of course, is a big moment in diplomacy between India and the United States. It's a point of inflection, as the American president defined it, because now what we're going to see are stronger ties being forged between these two nations. And it'll be very interesting to see as to the announcements that will be made in a short while from now. And also for the time being, let's also talk about something to do with a menu. And this is not any ordinary menu. This is not something that you find in a restaurant. This is the menu that has been laid out for the Indian Prime Minister during his state banquet that will have later this evening. Now, it is the state dinner menu. The White House officials are going all out for this event as well. A specially curated vegetarian meal is being prepared for the Indian Prime Minister as we speak. Now, the festivities will in fact take place on the south lawn of the White House. Even the decor has been customized to amalgamate the Indian and the American culture. So what are the dishes that will be on the menu for the Indian Prime Minister, and what's in store at the state dinner? Our next report gives you a glimpse of this.
A special plant-based menu has been curated for Indian Prime Minister Modi. Why? No points for guessing. It's because the Indian Prime Minister Modi is a devout vegetarian. This is understandable as a significant number of Indians are vegetarian. The First Lady Jill Biden has worked alongside the chefs to create the menu. Who are the chefs?
To introduce Chef Nina Curtis.
Guest Chef Nina Curtis.
Hello, everyone.
And White House executive pastry chef Susie Morrison have tailored the menu.
As some of you may know, Prime Minister Modi is a vegetarian. So we asked Chef Nina Curtis, a plant-based pioneer, to work with our White House chefs and create a stunning vegetarian menu.
Along with the Indian PM, over 400 guests are invited for the dinner. So, what should the guests expect? What's on the menu? For the first course, there will be a marinated millet and grilled kernel salad, along with compressed watermelon and some tangy avocado sauce. For the main course, guests will be served stuffed portobello mushrooms. There will also be a creamy saffron-infused risotto. Upon request, guests can have a lemon dill yogurt sauce and summer squashes. There will also be an option to add fish to the main course. The fish dishes will include a sumac roasted sea bass. Now let's see what's for dessert. There will be a rose and cardamom-infused strawberry shortcake. But what is dinner without some wine? The state dinner will have a variety of wine for the guests. There will be a Stone Tower Chardonnay Christie 2021, a Patel Red Blend 2019, and a Domaine Carnero Brut Rosé. Although the state dinner has a stunning menu, it is just the tip of the iceberg. The First Lady worked with David Stark Design and Production to tailor the dinner's ambience. From the design of the invitations to the decor and the south lawn, designers have merged American and Indian styles. How will they give the event an Indian touch? Well, the inspiration comes from India's national bird. The White House Social Secretary Carlos Elizondo says that the inspiration for our design really began with the peacock. We wanted to evoke that breathtaking feeling when it extends its tail, unveiling its colorful beauty, majesty, and strength. The pavilion is set to be draped in rich greens with saffron flowers on every table. The design represents the colors of the Indian flag. What's for the evening entertainment? Decorated artists will be performing. They include Joshua Bell, an American violinist and conductor, the United States Marine Band Chamber Orchestra. The White House Social Secretary has said that President Biden and Prime Minister Modi will give their toasts from an eagle lectern, a ritual that leaders have done at state dinners for decades. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of the News Bulletin. But don't go anywhere. Coming up on the other side, we'll continue to track the developments as they unfold at the White House. That's coming up next. Stay tuned.
आने वाली खुशी के लिए एक ख्याल ही काफी है। ईबिक्स कैश हर खुशी के लिए काफी है। कभी-कभी खुशी के लिए एक उदाहरण ही काफी है। ईबिक्स कैश हर खुशी के लिए काफी है।
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
After the collapse of the Kherson Dam and the deluge caused, fighting intensifies between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. As the much talked about Ukrainian counter-offensive seems to be getting underway, France, Germany and Poland firm up talks on the security guarantees Ukraine desperately needs. All eyes are now on NATO leaders' July summit in the Lithuanian capital. Will it focus on Ukraine's push for accession to NATO?
Who will be the next US president? As Trump gears up to take on Biden, his deputy Pence calls him unfit. But it's DeSantis who is drumming up support. A dozen Republicans in the fray and counting. Will a crowded contest benefit Trump? Race for the White House on WION. World is One.
Gravitas tells you stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation on ground at Gravitas? We don't just tell you stories from selected countries from around the world.
2 years since the Myanmar military coup, the people of Myanmar continue to live in a nightmare.
Because it does not suit their propaganda, or because they are too scared to speak truth to power.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views and analysis. WIONews.com. World is One.
Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
After the collapse of the Kherson Dam and the deluge caused, fighting intensifies between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. As the much talked about Ukrainian counter-offensive seems to be getting underway, France, Germany and Poland firm up talks on the security guarantees Ukraine desperately needs. All eyes are now on NATO leaders' July summit in the Lithuanian capital. Will it focus on Ukraine's push for accession to NATO?
Who will be the next US president? As Trump gears up to take on Biden, his deputy Pence calls him unfit. But it's DeSantis who is drumming up support. A dozen Republicans in the fray and counting. Will a crowded contest benefit Trump? Race for the White House on WION. The world is one.
Gravitas.
Welcome back to our continuous coverage of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first ever state visit to the United States of America. And just a short while from now, we expect to hear from the Indian Prime Minister and also the American President in the aftermath of the bilateral talks that they have held. And as we speak, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden are speaking to each other at the White House. We'll be getting all of the details. But first, let's take a look at what is making headlines at this hour. American President Joe Biden has hailed the defining partnership with India as he rolls out the red carpet for the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and goes on to describe the India-US relationship as the most defining relationship of the 21st century. And a debris field has been found by an underwater robot searching near the wreckage of the Titanic for the missing submersible on which 5 people were on board. And the United Nations has put the Russian military forces and its affiliated armed groups on its list of shame over violation of children's rights in the conflict during the war in Ukraine. And struggling with the rising inflation and the cost of living crisis, the United Kingdom has hiked its key lending rates to 5%, while Turkey has raised its lending rates to about 15% to rein in inflation. So this, of course, is the big moment. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Washington, D.C. and as we speak, he is in the Oval Office. He's holding a bilateral conversation with the American President Joe Biden. And minutes before beginning the top-level bilateral talks, both the US President and the Indian Prime Minister addressed the crowd that had gathered in the south lawns of the White House. Now, hundreds of members of the Indian-American diaspora had lined up outside of the south lawn to get a glimpse of the Indian Prime Minister. And these are live visuals that are being beamed out from inside of the White House. We expect the two leaders to in fact step up and address a joint press conference. And what is also being said is that the two leaders will also take questions from reporters. So preparations presently are underway as we expect the bilateral meeting to have come to an end, or should be in its virtual last stages between the two leaders. The stage is being set. The press conference is about to begin in a few moments from now, where the Indian Prime Minister and the American President will stand side by side and will again address the media. The dignitaries and, of course, the international media is gathered there. And this, of course, is a moment, a key moment, and a defining moment in terms of how the India-US partnership will, of course, be taken forward. Because remember, the United States appears to pull off all stops in terms of how it says it wants to take the India equation forward. The American president did not mince words. He came forth and he said that this is a relationship that will define the 21st century. Those are some very, very strong words there. The United States is looking for a reliable partner, and especially considering the divergence that exists between how the United States wants to deal with China and how some of the European nations such as France and Germany would want to deal with China. The United States wants a reliable friend in taking on China, is how many defense and geopolitical experts would put it. And this is the reason why the United States is so actively wooing India, with all stops having been pulled off. And this is going to be an important press briefing for several reasons. Firstly, it'll be interesting to see as to what announcements will, of course, be made. But the broad outlines in terms of some of the aspects that have been spoken about are pretty much out there in the public domain. We expect something to be said in terms of the defense sector. We also expect something to be said in terms of increasing people-to-people contacts. The rules for the H-1B visas are expected to be redesigned, and this will be a big step in the diplomatic ties, because Indians apparently are the people who make use of the H-1B visa more than people of any other nationality in the world. And the process of renewing the H-1B visas is likely to be streamlined and made much more easier. And apart from this, there are several other aspects of cooperation, be it in semiconductors, be it in space, be it in sharing technologies, be it in geostrategy. All of this, of course, we will, of course, hear from the two leaders in just a bit from now. And to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is expected this moment, we are being joined in by my colleague Molly Gambhir, who is joining us live on this broadcast. Molly, we expect the joint press briefing to begin in a moment from now. But what we are clearly witnessing at this moment is history in the making, where stronger ties are being forged between India and the United States.
Indeed, Saleh, we are just moments away now from the key deliverables that will be taking shape as far as the India-US partnership is concerned. A huge boost for the defense cooperation is expected. After all, India and the US realizing the need that the two sides have when it comes to partnering with the other side, and the potential really that this collaboration has. No wonder then that defense deals, the expectations of defense announcements and also tech ties have been underpinning the Indian Prime Minister's maiden state visit here. The relationship has already been called among the most consequential relationships. Of course, ties between the two sides have not always been smooth sailing, but over the past decade, they have reached a transformative moment, as the US officials have been calling it, and the Indian Prime Minister's visit here has been labeled as a springboard to touch new horizons. Also, the lifting of barriers, which is a very significant aspect of this visit, which sends out a strong message of partnership between the two sides, and also setting new benchmarks in defense industrial cooperation. Those have been the expectations, and the US, of course, hopes to bring India further into its defense and manufacturing orbit. Also hoping to wean New Delhi's military off Russia and also US supply chains off China. India also looking at the United States as a crucial partner when it comes to defense collaboration, and people-to-people ties, like you rightly pointed out, have been a very significant cornerstone of this relationship as well. And it's interesting how even when we talk about the sharing of technology and the crucial ISET, which is Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology, that also has been called as a way to build stronger people-to-people ties, to build to deepen the trust between the two sides and bring businesses in the two countries even closer.
Absolutely, indeed, Wally. Do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, we're also being joined by retired Colonel David Desroches. He's joining us live in this broadcast. Now, Colonel Desroches, now this is a crucial moment, is it not? Because in terms of what the American president had to say, when he spoke at the White House, at the lawns of the White House, he said that this is a relationship that will define the 21st century. Is that your assessment as well?
Guardedly so. I mean, there's been a great desire in American policy circles going back to the Kennedy administration to have closer links with India. This narrative of the world's two most populous democracies. The fact that we have a broader range of common interests, it just seems logical that we should have a more robust partnership across a whole range of issues, not just security. It looked as though we were having a serious breakthrough in the George W. Bush administration when Washington took the lead in waiving nuclear proliferation sanctions against India. But time and time again, we've run up into various issues of inaccessibility of the market and really the persistence of what I would argue is a long dead Cold War appropriate non-alignment mentality among Indians' foreign policy elites. I think that the fact that the Chinese have actually killed Indian soldiers on Indian soil may have finally dispelled that sort of 1956 thinking. So I'm guardedly optimistic.
Absolutely. It's very interesting the way you've put it. The fact is India follows a foreign policy that caters to the interests of the Indian people. So during the Cold War, the Indian position was a principled one where India said that they do not want to take any sides when the two superpowers were having a go at each other. But now the Cold War era is over and India's foreign policy has, of course, evolved. And what we now have is a policy of strategic autonomy. Again, we don't take sides in India, but still follow a policy that is something that serves best the people of India. With that being the context, Colonel Desroches, do you see this convergence? Because the United States is quite clearly looking for allies here. Because in terms of how the Europeans want to deal with China, in terms of the equation that the Europeans want to have with China, for instance, Germany and France have divergence in terms of how they view their relation to China vis-a-vis the United States. And therefore, the United States is looking for a reliable partner to, in fact, take on the Chinese threat. Is that the reason why the two nations are moving closer to each other?
It's part of the reason, and I would argue that the clinging to non-alignment has not served India's interests, but that's another argument. Japan or countries like France and Germany.
I just need to interject there because we see the Indian Prime Minister and the American President just stepping up to the lectern there. We expect the joint press briefing. Let's in fact listen to what is being said at the White House there.
And the Prime Minister, I know you've got to get up to Capitol Hill very soon and to address the joint session to Congress. It's a testament to the strong and enduring and thoroughly bipartisan support that exists all across the United States for the friendship and partnership between the United States that they're anxiously waiting to hear you up on Capitol Hill. A partnership that is among the most consequential in the world, that is stronger, closer, and more dynamic than any time in history. Mr. Prime Minister, we've met many times over the past few years, most recently in Hiroshima at the G7 summit, And each time I was struck by our ability to find new areas of cooperation. Together, we're unlocking the shared future of what I believe to be unlimited potential. And with this visit, we're demonstrating once more how India and the United States are collaborating on nearly every human endeavor and delivering progress across the board. From designing new ways to diagnose and treat illnesses like cancer and diabetes, to collaborating on human spaceflight, including sending an Indian astronaut to the International Space Station in 2024, to accelerating the global clean energy transition and tackling the climate crisis we face, to harnessing our shared expertise on critical and emerging technologies like quantum computing and artificial intelligence, to ensuring they are not used as tools of misinformation and oppression. We are doubling down on our cooperation to secure our semiconductor supply chains, advancing Open RAN telecommunications networks, and growing our major defense partnership with the more joint exercises, more cooperation between our defense industries, and more consultation and coordination across all domains. Our economic relationship is booming. Trade between our countries has almost doubled over the past decade to more than $191 billion, supporting tens of thousands of good jobs in both India and the United States. Add to that, 1 million American jobs across 44 states will be supported by the purchase of more than 200 American-made Boeing aircraft by that Air India is announcing earlier this year. And with this visit, Indian firms are announcing more than $2 billion in new investments in manufacturing, solar in Colorado, steel in Ohio, and optic fiber in South Carolina, and much more. Further proof that America's manufacturing is back. We're expanding educational exchanges for our students, building on the record 125,000 student visas for Indians to study in the United States we issued last year, and opening new consulates that's going to make it easier for our people to travel, work, and collaborate together. On the issues that matter most and that will define the future, our nations look to one another, including on critical regional and global issues. And today, we also talked about our shared efforts to mitigate the humanitarian tragedies unleashed by Russia's brutal war in Ukraine and to defend the core principles of the UN Charter's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We discussed our work through the Quad and how India and the United States, together with Australia and Japan, can ensure the vital Indo-Pacific region remains free, open, prosperous, and secure. Through our new I2U2 grouping with Israel and the UAE, we're building regional connections to the Middle East and spurring science-based solutions to global challenges like food security and clean energy. And this year, under India's leadership of the G20, we're putting sustainable development at the center of the agenda. We're delivering meaningful action on low and middle-income nations, including multilateral development bank reform, debt relief, and building resilient and equitable health systems. The bottom line is simple. We want people everywhere to have the opportunity to live in dignity. And let me close with this. Indians and Americans are both peoples who innovate and create, turn obstacles into opportunities, who find strength in community and family, and who cherish freedom and celebrate the democratic values of universal human rights, which face challenges around the world and in each of our countries, but which remain so vital to the success of each of our nations. Press freedom, religious freedom, tolerance, diversity. India now is the most populous country in the world. It's a democracy. We understand that it is the brilliance and the backbone of our people, as diverse and talents and traditions that make us strong as a nation. It's democracies that do that. We see that so clearly here in the United States, where a vibrant Indian American community of more than 4 million strong contributes every single day to the writing of the future of our nation. Indian Americans of every background and faith, representing the full diversity of India, are pursuing their American dream while maintaining deep connections for their Indian heritage and families. That makes us all stronger. That is a cornerstone of this essential partnership between India and the United States. And that is why I know the friendship between our nations is only going to grow as we face the future together. Mr. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency,
Your Excellency, President Biden,
दोनों देशों के delegates,
delegates of both countries,
मीडिया के साथियों,
friends from the media,
नमस्कार।
Namaskar.
सबसे पहले मैं
First of all, I thank President Biden for his warm words and for his positive views on India-America relations. Friends, today is a day that has special importance in the history of India-America relations. Our discussions today and the important decisions we have taken have added a new chapter to our comprehensive and a global strategic partnership. They have given it a new direction and a new energy. Friends, a trade and investment partnership between India and America is important not only for our two countries, but for the global economy as well. Today, America is India's biggest trade partner. We have decided to resolve long pending trade-related issues and make a new beginning. The initiative for critical and emerging technologies, ICET, has emerged as an important framework for our technical cooperation. By increasing our cooperation in fields such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, space, quantum, and telecom, we are creating a strong and futuristic partnership. The decision taken by American companies such as Micron, Google, and Applied Materials to invest in India symbolizes this futuristic partnership. During this journey, I also had the opportunity to meet some other American CEOs, and in my discussions with them, I could feel their enthusiasm and their positive views about India. We both agree that to make our strategic technology partnership meaningful, it is very important that governments, businesses, and academic institutions come together in order to implement India and America's shared vision on clean energy transition. We have taken several important initiatives. These cover areas such as green hydrogen, wind energy, battery storage, and carbon capture. We have also decided that in the midst of global uncertainties, India and America will, as trusted partners, create reliable, secure, and resilient global supply chains and value chains as well. The close defense cooperation between India and America symbolizes our mutual trust and shared strategic priorities. Moving away from the old buyer-seller relationship we had earlier, we have transitioned today to a relationship involving transfer of technology, co-development, and co-production. The decision taken by General Electric to manufacture engines in India through transfer of technology is a landmark agreement. This also opens up new job opportunities in both countries. This will give our defense cooperation a new character in the times to come. The defense industries and startups of both countries are important partners in this cooperation. Bringing them together is the key objective of our defense industrial roadmap. In the area of space science and technologies, we have had long-standing cooperation.
By taking the decision to join the Artemis Accords, we have taken a big leap forward in our space cooperation. In fact, in short, for India and America partnership, even the sky is not the limit. Friends, the most important pillar of our relations is our people-to-people ties. More than 4 million people of Indian origin today make significant contribution to the progress of America. In fact, just this morning, the large number of Indians that gathered at the White House demonstrates that the Indian Americans, in fact, are the real strength behind our relations. In order to further deepen these relations, we welcome America's decision to open consulates in Bengaluru and Ahmedabad. Similarly, we will also open a new Indian consulate in Seattle. Friends, in our meeting today, we discussed several regional and global issues. Peace and security in the Indo-Pacific is our common priority. We agree that the development and success of this region is important for the entire world. We shared our views to enhance coordination with all countries in this region along with our Quad partners. India and America stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight against terrorism and fundamentalism. We were in agreement that concrete actions are needed in order to end cross-border terrorism. The COVID pandemic and the Ukraine conflict have afflicted the countries of the Global South in particular. We believe that in order to resolve these problems, it is absolutely imperative for all countries to unite. From the very beginning of the events in Ukraine, India has laid emphasis on resolution of dispute through dialogue and diplomacy. We are completely ready to contribute in any way we can to restore peace. Under India's G20 presidency, we are laying emphasis on the spirit of one earth, one family, one future. We are lending a voice to the priorities of the Global South. I thank President Biden that he has expressed support to my proposal of giving the African Union full membership of the G20. Friends, the core philosophy of all of our collective efforts is to strengthen democracy and democratic values and democratic order. two of the world's largest democracies, India and America, can together make an important contribution to global peace, stability, and prosperity. I'm confident that based on these values, we will be able to fulfill the expectations and aspirations of not only the people of our two countries, but of the entire world. President Biden, thank you for the meaningful discussion today. This year, during the G20 summit, we are looking forward to welcoming you. This is myself and all of India is looking forward to welcoming you to India. And as President has said, I do have another engagement after this. I need to address the Congress, so I do not want to take any more time. And I am going to stop here. Once again, President Biden, thank you very much.
Well, the Congress is actually anxiously waiting to hear you. I'm told there are two questioners, Sabrina from the Wall Street Journal and Kumar from the Trust of India. And Sabrina, you first.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the Prime Minister, but first a two-part question for you. Your comments at a fundraiser this week appear to be the first time in recent memory that a sitting U.S. president has called a Chinese leader a dictator. Did those comments about President Xi undermine or complicate the progress your administration has made in maintaining a relationship with China? And secondly, on India, as you raise these broader issues of human rights and democracy, what is your message to those, including some members of your own party, who say that your administration is overlooking the targeting of religious minorities and crackdown on dissent in Prime Minister Modi's country?
The answer to your first question is no. When we're talking to our allies and partners around the world, including India, we let the idea of my choosing and avoiding saying what I think is the facts with regard to the relationship with India, with China, is just not something I'm going to change very much. I think I believe that, and I've said this for some time, that the hysteria about the relationship with China is collapsing and moving, et cetera, we had an incident that caused some confusion, you might say. But the Secretary Blinken had a great trip to China. I expect to be meeting with President Xi sometime in the future, in the near term, and I don't think it's had any real consequence. And what was your second question?
So as you raise these broader issues of human rights and democracy, what is your message to those, including some members of your own party, who believe that your administration is overlooking the targeting of religious minorities and a crackdown on dissent in India?
Well, look, the Prime Minister and I had a good discussion about democratic values, and that's the nature of our relationship. We're straightforward with each other, and we respect each other. One of the fundamental reasons that I believe the U.S.-China relationship is not in the space it is in the U.S.-Indian relationship is that there's an overwhelming respect for each other because we're both democracies. And it's a common democratic character of both our countries and our people, our diversity, our culture, our open, tolerant, robust debate. And I believe that we believe in the dignity of every citizen. And it is in America's DNA, and I believe in India's DNA, that the whole world has a stake in our success, both of us, in maintaining our democracies, makes us appealing partners, and enables us to expand democratic institutions around the world. And I believe this, and I still believe this.
Mr. Prime Minister, India has long prided itself as the world's largest democracy, but there are many human rights groups who say that your government has discriminated against religious minorities and sought to silence its critics. As you stand here in the east room of the White House, where so many world leaders have made commitments to protecting democracy, what steps are you and your government willing to take to improve the rights of Muslims and other minorities in your country and to uphold free speech?
I'm actually really surprised that people say so and so. People don't say it. Indeed, India is a democracy. And as President Biden also mentioned, India and America, both countries, democracy is in our DNA. Democracy is our spirit. Democracy runs in our veins. We live democracy, and our ancestors have actually put words to this concept, and that is in the form of our Constitution. Our government has taken the basic principles of democracy, and on that basis, our Constitution is made, and the entire country runs on that. Our Constitution and our government, we have always proved that democracy can deliver. And when I say deliver, this is regardless of caste, creed, religion, gender. There's absolutely no space for discrimination. And when you talk of democracy, if there are no human values and there is no humanity, there are no human rights, then it's not a democracy. And that is why when you say democracy and you accept democracy, and when we live democracy, then there is absolutely no space for discrimination. And that is why India believes in moving ahead with everybody with trust and with everybody's efforts. These are our foundation principles, which are the basis of how we operate, how we live our lives. In India, the benefits that are provided by the government is accessible to all. Whoever deserves those benefits is available to everybody. And that is why in India's democratic values, there is absolutely no discrimination, neither on basis of caste, creed, or age, or any kind of geographic location.
Kumar. Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. Sir, my question is on the issue of climate change. Both countries have spoken strongly about the need to tackle the climate change, but there is a view. Both countries have spoken about the challenge of climate change, but there is a view that ambitious targets are set, but implementation is found often lacking. And there is also a criticism of lack of technological transfer, financial transfer from the developed countries to the developing nations. How do you both leaders see the way ahead on this pressing issue?
Well, first of all, I think it is the existential threat to humanity, climate change. It's the most serious problem we face as human beings. We have to keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We've made enormous progress here in the United States on dealing with this issue by doing three things. Number one, by insisting that we move every one of our industries into a position where they can take advantage of cheaper and more extensive and more available renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind or hydrogen and green hydrogen. There's a whole range of things we've been working on. In addition to that, we find ourselves in a position that what we've done is that we have significantly reduced for example, I made a commitment that we were going to make sure that by 2030, 30% of all our land and sea and oceans were in conservation, could not be developed. We're well on our way to doing that, and that's also absorbing carbon from the air as a consequence of that because of the conservation. We are in a position as well that we have provided for significant increase in funding for a whole range of issues, but not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world. For example, we're working with the G7 to provide for infrastructure work for dealing with global warming. on the continent of Africa, in Angola, building the largest solar project, moving ourselves, having railway to go all the way across the southern two-thirds, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean in Africa, to be able to transport and do it cheaper and do it with less, how can I say it, less carbon emissions. We're trying to work with other countries to maintain their carbon sinks so they don't have to develop them like we did in causing pollution. And we're trying to figure out how to work out to pay them not to develop certain areas like the Amazon and Brazil. But there's a lot of technology that's available that we're sharing and we share with one another. We've learned how to do solar energy, which is considerably cheaper than it is for fossil fuels. The same way dealing with not just solar, but dealing with wind. And so there's a lot of technology that we've developed, and we're well on our way, I think, to meeting the commitment we made that we made in Paris. And we're prepared to share all of that with India that has a desire to do the same.
Excellency, you said very rightly that as far as India is concerned, the environment, climate, these are extremely important in our cultural traditions. For us, the environment is an article of faith. This is not just something that we need to do for convenience. We believe this. We do not believe in the exploitation of nature. In order for all of creation to work, we can make nature, but we cannot have exploitation of nature. And we have always believed this. And on the basis of these values, we are not only doing things for ourselves, but are taking some global initiatives as well. You perhaps know that the G20 countries, the promises they made in Paris, of all the G20 countries, India is the only country that has fulfilled all the promises it made at the G20. Not just that, in the area of solar energy in Glasgow, we had set ourselves the target to achieve 500 gigawatts of renewable energy. By 2030, we have set ourselves the target to make Indian Railways net zero. And you must understand the scale of Indian Railways. When we talk about Indian Railways, it means that every day the entire population of Australia travels in our wagons, in our railway wagons, on our trains. And we have set ourselves the target to achieve net zero for our railways. We have also set ourselves targets for solar energy, for ethanol, 10% mix of ethanol. We have completed this target before the set date. We are also working in the area of green hydrogen. We want India to be a green hydrogen hub, and we are working towards this. In the International Solar Alliance has been launched by India, and many countries have joined it and are working with India. The island countries, we have helped them in the area of solar energy so that they have now got a new confidence that we are with them in their efforts to fight climate change. And we will not only fulfill our responsibilities, but we will also help you in the area of climate change. We have seen that due to natural calamities, people talk about the death of people, no doubt, when there are natural disasters, but there is a lot of destruction of infrastructure as well. And therefore, because of climate change, the kind of crisis we are feeling, we need to develop infrastructure that is resilient. And therefore, we have created a global organization called CDRI. And you perhaps know that in Glasgow, I presented a subject to the world. And recently it was launched by the UN Secretary General and myself. That is Mission Life. And when I say life, I mean lifestyle for the environment. Therefore, every individual must live his life in a pro-environment, pro-development way. And we are working towards this. And I am sure that whatever work India has started in all these areas, not because India has adversely affected the environment of the world. We are doing this because we have a concern for future generations. We do not want to give our future generations a world that make life difficult for them. And therefore, as a global responsibility, India has not caused any problems to the environment. However, we are playing a leading role in contributing in a positive manner as far as prosperous countries are concerned. There's always been talk about technology transfer, financial support, and there are some countries that need to have technology transfer, financial support, and we hope that as soon as we can move forward in this area, we will be able to solve this challenge of climate change. Thank you very much.
We have caused damage in the United States the way we developed over the last 300 years. And that's why I was able to convince my colleagues in the Congress to pass legislation, the largest climate fund ever in American and in world history, $369 billion. $369 billion to deal with the climate crisis. And we're doing it extensively now, and I think you're going to see significant progress. Thank you all very, very much.
All right, so that was the joint press briefing and also the press conference in which both leaders took some pretty hard questions and answered about a couple of important issues. And this, remember, has been a bilateral meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also the American President Joe Biden. And it went on for well over an hour. And there were a lot of issues that have been discussed, be it in terms of defense cooperation, be it in terms of increasing people-to-people contact, and we expect a whole host of different agreements which probably could fructify as a reason in the aftermath of these bilateral talks. It will now be very interesting to see as to how this relationship progresses from here. Now, just the optics of what is being said and what is coming through is very interesting. Because the Indian Prime Minister is, of course, on his first ever state visit to the United States of America. The United States is actively looking for allies as it tries to take on China, which has been pretty belligerent and is threatening the American position of being the numero uno nation in terms of its economy and its military power in the nation at this moment, which is why the United States is actively looking for partners, with allies with whom it can team itself in, which is also the reason why, as to the American president, as to why the American President Joe Biden went on to define and describe the India-US relationship as the relationship that will define the 21st century. Now, it remains to be seen as to how things will, of course, progress from here. And the Indian Prime Minister took a couple of questions from the reporters who were gathered at the White House there. He spoke about a couple of important two issues as to how India continues to remain such an important and a vibrant democracy despite the few niggles and the few challenges that of course, India faces at the moment. But an important milestone nonetheless. And this of course, is a great and an important visit by the Indian Prime Minister in the United States of America. And my colleague Molly Gambhir, of course, is joining us live on this broadcast. Molly, we just heard from the two leaders there, and we expect more details, of course, will emerge in terms of what, of course, happens from here. But this is an important relationship that is being forged, that is being taken forward by the Indian Prime Minister as a part of his very first state visit to the United States of America.
Indeed, Sally, the very fact that the American president started off by describing the India-US relationship as the most consequential relationship is an indication enough of the importance that the United States is attaching to its partnership with India, which in itself is indicative through the very fact that the Indian Prime Minister is here on a state visit. This is his maiden state visit here in the United States, only the third leader that the American president has invited. So the US and India both realizing the potential that the collaboration really has on multiple levels, be it defense industrial cooperation, being tech ties, being people-to-people ties, be it space, climate change, and as anticipated, all of those areas are finding a very prominent mention in that joint address by the two leaders as well. Like I said, the American president starting off at the outset mentioning India as a trusted partner and the significance that the relationship between the two sides really has. Just to take you over through some of the key pointers that have been mentioned. There was a mention about, first of all, the defense cooperation. We're also talking about the Artemis Accords, which will be bringing like-minded countries together on civil space exploration. Also looking at how U.S. Applied Materials also earlier announced the new semiconductor center for commercialization and innovation and in India and lab research. A wide-ranging statement really coming in from the two leaders, touching upon the issue of climate change as well, where the American president has spoken about how the U.S. has caused considerable damage to climate change in the way it has developed over the past 300 years. A question also on China, where the president, in a way, shrugged off the Chinese complaints about his use of the word dictator to describe the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and said that he was simply speaking out the facts.
Absolutely, indeed, Molly. Do continue to stay on with this. So this, of course, is an important visit by the Indian Prime Minister. A whole host of different issues have, in fact, been spoken. And we also, in a short while from now, we expect the Indian Prime Minister to be addressing the joint sitting of the American Congress. But Molly, looking at the terms of the specifics, the details that are coming out in terms of the various areas of convergence and the issues that are being spoken about, it does appear that that India and the United States are gearing up for a new era in terms of defense cooperation, because the Americans, it does appear, because of the allies that they want in taking on China, are more willing than ever before to transfer technology to India. And this, of course, is going to make a big difference. And the Americans are also trying really hard to try wean India away from India's dependence on Russian military hardware. Now, you've been speaking to people out there. How successful do you think the Americans can actually be in trying to wean India away from the Russian military hardware that we continue to import from the Russians?
Right, Sally, and even in our conversations with the experts here in Washington, D.C., they have spoken about how there is a growing realization here in the United States of the importance that India has as a trusted partner when it comes to defense cooperation, but also when it comes to countering China. And that is the reason why, in part, why the United States is going out of its way to cement this relationship with India on multiple levels. Having said that, of course, we are aware that defense cooperation and tech ties have been underpinning the Indian Prime Minister's visit here. The initiative on critical and emerging technology, which has been one of the crucial aspects of this visit, the sharing of technology and the lifting of barriers overall. Also, how the defense partnership is set to propel the strategic relationship further when it comes to the specifics that have been discussed in the run-up to the visit as well. How the decision to jointly manufacture jet engines would put India in an exclusive club of countries. Only 4 countries so far that have mastered jet engine technology. Also, the sharing of technology, which, as one of the experts pointed out in our conversations, is something that was long due, and which is the reason why now that the United States and India are taking that step forward. There will be multiple outcomes as a result of that, because there will be a domino effect as far as the ISET initiative is concerned as well.
Absolutely indeed, Molly. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us all those updates there. We'll of course come back to you as more details emerge in this developing story. So this of course is the big update. The Indian Prime Minister and the American President Joe Biden have concluded their bilateral meeting. They also came and took questions from the press there. And that, of course, was a pretty important press briefing by the two leaders. And we'll slip into a short break now. More news and updates will continue on the other side as we continue to track the Indian Prime Minister's first ever state visit to the United States of America. And some time from now, we expect the Indian Prime Minister to also be addressing the joint sitting of the American Congress. He'll be doing this the second time. No other Indian leader in India's independent history has ever done this. And this, of course, puts Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a league of his own. We'll be getting you the details as they emerge, but that's coming up on the other side of this short break. Stay tuned to WION.
आने वाली खुशी के लिए एक ख्याल ही काफी है। ईबिक्स कैश हर खुशी के लिए काफी है। कभी-कभी खुशी के लिए एक उदाहरण ही काफी है। ईबिक्स कैश हर खुशी के लिए काफी है।
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at wion.com.
After the collapse of the Kherson Dam and the deluge caused, fighting intensifies between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. As the much talked about Ukrainian counter-offensive seems to be getting underway, France, Germany and Poland firm up talks on the security guarantees Ukraine desperately needs. All eyes are now on NATO leaders' July summit in the Lithuanian capital. Will it focus on Ukraine's push for accession to NATO?
Who will be the next US president? As Trump gears up to take on Biden, his deputy Pence calls him unfit. But it's DeSantis who is drumming up support. A dozen Republicans in the fray and counting. Will a crowded contest benefit Trump? Race for the White House on WION. World is one.
Gravitas tells you stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation on ground? At Gravitas, we don't just tell you stories from selected countries from around the world.
2 years since the Myanmar military coup, the people of Myanmar continue to live in a nightmare.
Because it does not suit their propaganda, or because they are too scared to speak truth to power.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views and analysis. WIONews.com. World is one.
Well, thanks for staying with us. You're watching Beyond World is One. My name is Mohammed Saleh. And let's start this broadcast by taking a look as to what is making headlines at this hour. The American President Joe Biden has hailed the defining partnership with India as he rolls out the red carpet for the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. A debris field has been discovered by an underwater robot searching near the wreckage of the Titanic for a missing submersible vessel in which 5 people were on board. The United Nations has put the Russian military forces and its affiliated armed groups in its list of shame over violation of children's rights in the conflict during the war in Ukraine. All right, so as we speak, it is history that is being rewritten. Just a few seconds ago, The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the American President Joe Biden concluded their joint press conference. Now, this was a rare meet, and this, of course, was a rare press meet for the Indian leader as well. The remarks in which both leaders lauded the strengthening of bilateral relationship. And it came after the two had their bilateral meeting at the Oval Office, along with their delegations for these high-stakes talks. Listening to what was said in this press briefing.
First of all, today is a day that has special importance in the history of India-America relations. Our discussions today and the important decisions we have taken have added a new chapter to our comprehensive and a global strategic partnership. They have given it a new direction and a new energy.
Now, the two leaders in their remarks also highlighted about a free and an open Indo-Pacific as their priority. The importance to the region as expected as countering China remains a key priority and a common interest for Washington and also for New Delhi. Now, the Indian Prime Minister also announced the opening of a new US consulate in the tech city of Bengaluru. Alongside, the two leaders also discussed the Ukrainian war. Biden said that the tragedies of the conflict were talked about, and a lot was also discussed on a whole host of different aspects. And during the press briefing, during the question round with members of the press, Biden was asked about his recent comment on the Chinese President Xi Jinping, where he had called Xi a dictator at the Democrats' dinner. And also to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is happening at this moment, we're being joined in by Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone, who is joining us live on this broadcast. We're also being joined by senior journalist Ray Locker, who is also joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Jessica, let me in fact begin with you. This has, of course, been an important press briefing that was given by the Indian Prime Minister and also the American President Joe Biden. A whole host of different issues were, of course, discussed during the bilateral meeting. What do you think stands out in terms of what was said in that press briefing there?
Well, I think the first thing that stands out and will be written about by a great many people here in the United States is the fact that Prime Minister Modi took questions on human rights, took a question on human rights from a Wall Street Journal reporter, and in fact was asked about the human rights record of India, which of course has come under criticism. There are more than 70 members of Congress who have asked the White House to cancel the visit in order to, and some of whom will not be attending the speech in just a few moments' time over that human rights record. But what we heard from Modi today is that, in fact, he leaned on the democratic history of India and said there's no place in India for discrimination, and that human values and humanity mandate that there be no discrimination. So we had a pretty clear denial from Prime Minister Modi today that there is any discrimination or human rights violations inside India. So I can imagine well that will be very well parsed. I think the other main thing I want to bring up is that Prime Minister Modi was very clear about India's position on the conflict in Ukraine. Of course, that is also a source of tension between these two countries, a slight source of tension, but certainly both countries have different perspectives on their relationships with Russia. And he said, quote, the Ukraine conflict hurts the global South the most. He said, we are completely ready to contribute in any way we can to restore peace. We are lending a voice to the priorities of the global South. And so you can well imagine that India will continue to be both a voice for the global South, but also potentially a mediator, as China is attempting to be, between Russia and Ukraine. So those are the two main things that stood out to me.
Absolutely, indeed. And Ms. Raylocker, if I can bring you in on this. Now, the American president, in his opening remarks, in the lawns of the White House, he described the India-US equation as probably the most important and the defining relationship of the 21st century. What's your assessment of that?
Well, I think he's exactly right. I mean, India is now the most populous nation in the world. It's growing economically. It stands on its own, and the United States has to forge its own relationship with India, not kind of pitted against other countries like Pakistan or China. The U.S.-India relationship is its own thing, and it's only going to get bigger and stronger.
Absolutely, indeed. And also considering, the points of divergence that the United States has, especially with certain European nations such as France and Germany who would want to deal differently with China. Mr. Raylocker, do you think the United States is in fact trying to forge bonds with India because there is a point of divergence when it comes to its own allies in Europe in terms of how it has to deal with China?
Absolutely. And look, India is only getting bigger and stronger. And in many ways, it's replacing China as a manufacturing center. And I think that's only going to continue. So for the United States to have stronger relations with India, it only helps that.
Absolutely. And Jessica, if I can bring you in on this, in some time from now, we expect the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to be addressing a joint sitting of the Congress. He'll be doing this for a second time in the last few years. And this, of course, puts him in a league of his own. Tell us as to why, something like this is so important in forging closer ties between two nations.
Well, it really is a very